Welcome into episode 129 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm August Trometer.
Congress nibbles at the Internet of Things. Out of sight is not off the grid. And what's the difference between an RSA presentation and an episode of The Checklist? The answer may amaze you. Find out on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. News of interesting legislation crossed my radar this week that changed quickly to an opportunity missed, in my estimation. You tell me if I'm wrong, August. CNET says Congress introduced a bill on Monday to improve Internet of Things security. According to the piece, the Internet of Things Cybersecurity Improvement Act wants to make sure the federal government isn't buying devices that can be easily hacked. Now, we've talked in the past about security risks baked into Internet of Things devices, and Capitol Hill has heard such talk. Quoting CNET again, at a Senate hearing last year, Lieutenant General Robert Ashley, Director of Defense Intelligence Agency, told lawmakers that insecure IoT devices are one of the most important emerging cyber threats to U.S. national security. There's no national standard for IoT security, and it's up to each company to decide how secure they want to make their connected devices. So Congress wants to hit them in the pocketbook. The proposed law will not require IoT device makers to strengthen security. However, if those device makers want to sell to the federal government, there will be what CNET calls a bare minimum of security standards for anything the government buys. According to the piece, the legislation wouldn't have security standards for IoT companies across the board, just ones that want to sell to the U.S. government. The hope is that by improving security standards for the federal government, one of the largest customers available, standards for the entire IoT market would improve along with it. Now, without having read the legislation, just, having read the write-up on it, what's your thinking around legislation like this?
Well, first of all, let me ask, is it creepy that the legislation acronym is IoT CIA?
Is that really it?
I believe so.
Oh, IoT CIA, seriously.
You can't make that stuff up.
I was trying to, well, apparently you can because people do. I was trying to figure out how you would pronounce it, but I didn't even just write it all out. So yeah, IoT CIA. Yes, the answer to your question, that is creepy.
And honestly, we're talking about our government here. They protect all of our secrets. They protect things like, launch codes to nuclear missiles. And the government only wants a bare minimum of security.
I think that is what CNET said. I don't think that's what the legislation said, in fairness. Okay. I don't think they said, well, just do as little as possible, but look like we're doing something, even though that might be what it looks like to people in the end.
You're right. I haven't read it. In principle, I'm all for something like this. I've said before the legislation is the best and maybe the only way to help protect everyone from all of this technology that's advancing on our lives. That said, I hope, number one, that the legislation doesn't include some crazy provision to force backdoors for law enforcement. And number two, it's not just the military that needs protecting. Consumers need protected as well.
Yeah, you see, and that's why this comes across to me as a missed opportunity. But, we'll get there in a moment. First of all, if you're thinking you've heard us do this story before, we haven't. We've done something similar, though. CNET says this bill is not like California's SB 327. So we've done stories about Internet of Things legislation, although the legislation is very different. California's SB 327 is the country's first IoT security law that passed last September. California's law requires specific security measures that device makers have to adhere to, like getting rid of default passwords and requiring users to generate their own passwords before allowing device access. Remind me, where did you land on that legislation when we were talking about it last year?
I was really excited about it, mostly because the steps they laid out made a lot of sense. And, as we know, as California goes, so does the country eventually. But between these two pieces of legislation, I'd like to think we're finally taking concrete steps to make sure hackers have a much harder time getting into our homes.
See, it's interesting because while the California legislation certainly sounds like it would do more than the federal legislation, the California law does have its detractors. The biggest complaint that people have, according to a separate CNET piece, is that law is vague and doesn't go far enough in its protections. It's also worth noting that it doesn't go into effect until the start of 2020, which, as we record, is about 9 months from now. But one imagines there are any number of lawsuits that could push that down the road a tiny bit. Now, there is another reason that the proposed federal measure leaves me flat personally. If passed, the piece says the federal Internet of Things security bill would require recommendations from the National Institute of Standards and Technology on security standards the federal government should follow. NIST would also review that policy every 5 years, according to the bill. Now, I understand that almost nothing gets done in 5 years in D.C., but waiting 5 years to update security measures, that's insane.
5 years is forever in internet time.
Yeah. Yeah, we won't even be calling it the internet in 5 years. That's how fast this whole thing moves. We'll just be calling it Thinky Think or something,
Well, think about this for a second. We really didn't have an Internet of Things 5 years ago.
Yeah, the term, I think, was just starting to come into... I remember the first time I understood what Internet of Things meant. It was at least 3 or 4 years ago, but it was, that's going to be a thing that happens one day. And now it's very much a thing that's happening right this minute. And they're just getting around to thinking maybe we should think about how we're going to secure it. Maybe.
Well, all I can say is hopefully other states, such as California, will help speed up that sort of check your security timeline. Mm-hmm. And while I don't disagree with the detractors of the California bill, you got to be careful here. It's like sitting down at a table and saying, I'm not eating dinner because you said there's no ice cream at the end. Some progress is better than none. And if we can at least move forward, that's a good thing. If it doesn't cover everything, that's okay, as long as we're making steps forward.
See, the only concern that I have there, and I can be on either side of that argument, either with you or disagreeing with you. The one concern that I have is once people hear that California has done something, or once people hear that the federal government has done something, they'll think, oh, good, well, then it's taken care of. It's a question of, to me, and I can see where the detractors are on this. I see where you are on it as well. But I can see where the detractors would say, okay, that's a good first step. Is California going to look at this legislation as a first step? Or is California going to look at this legislation as having crossed the finish line? Now, I will say the other thing that worries me about the federal thing, and you mentioned it a moment ago, it's not just the government that needs protection, it's consumers as well. Buying needs for the federal government and, things that people might buy at Staples or Best Buy, they're wildly different. Probably the federal government is not buying many web-connected picture frames, right? The little impulse buys are like the toys, like those dolls that, people were actually able to access what your kids were saying to the doll because they were so poorly, I don't even want to say they were poorly secured because they were completely insecure. And that is not going to... No guy at a toy company in China is going to be sitting there going, I really don't think DOD is going to buy this doll if we don't really lock it up.
No, but, the government will be buying some consumer level technology or at least militarized upgrades of that technology. And in the end, I think many companies will simply opt to adopt standards across the board just to ease manufacturing. If you're going to have two sets of chips, one that is okay for the U.S. government and one that's okay for consumers, sooner or later, from a monetary point of view, you're going to go, let's just make it one chip.
I kind of understand what you're saying, although like you, I worry about what happens with consumers. You surprise me. You're actually being a bit more optimistic than I am. on this story. But, maybe that shouldn't surprise me. I just don't realize what a pessimist I am. There are things, by the way, that we can all think about when deciding on Internet of Things. What sort of things would you suggest people consider when they're doing that, August?
Oh, wow. I think the very first thing you can do is ask yourself, do you need the thing that you're buying to be connected to the internet? I mean, really, seriously, think about it. Do you, if you're not going to use apps on your TV, does it need to be connected to the internet? I don't think so.
Well, good luck buying a TV that isn't smart at this point, though.
But you know what I'm saying. I mean, so I bought a kitchen device, and the only way you can use it is by using an app on my phone. I mean, what happened to the days when you could just press the on button?
I'm really curious what kitchen device you bought that was that, but I think there's a reason you're saying that you're not saying, because you don't want your kitchen device taken over by somebody listening to this show, some crafty individual listening to this show.
They're going to burn my steak.
I understand. Oh, okay. Oh, you got the web-connected George Foreman grill. That's fine. Yeah. All right. So, I mean, it's a good question, honestly. Does the thing that you're buying need to be an Internet of Things thing? What else?
Exactly.
What else should people consider?
Well, and this is in the California law, but if said thing comes with a default password, change that password immediately and use a strong password. And whatever you do, don't use a password that you've used for anything else. Make sure to continue to update any software or firmware for any devices that you have. Keeping those updates current. Make sure you have the latest security upgrades, which is so important. We've mentioned this in a previous checklist, but try and use a separate email for your devices, preferably one that you only use for IoT devices and nothing else. Gmail is a great way to generate a new email address, and don't share it or use it anywhere else. And then finally, if you notice something weird going on in your home network, the best way to help figure out the problem is disconnect all your devices, then reconnect them one by one until you see the weird behavior again. The last device connected is probably the bad guy.
And if you'd like to dig more into the Internet of Things thing, checklist number 42. Quite a while ago now, we actually covered Internet of Things stuff. So for a deeper dive into Internet of Things, securemac.com/checklist, and look for checklist number 42, the Internet of Things.
Incredible.
Out of sight may mean out of mind, but it doesn't mean off the grid. Years ago, my father joined Facebook, and it was really great when just a few days later he told me that he had quit Facebook. Now, I can never get a clear idea of what he thought he had done to quit, but a month later he told me where he'd, seen me say XYZ, I can't remember, something on Facebook. I think it was about a new episode of a show that I was doing or something. Now, I've heard from others as well who decided that an app wasn't for them, so they deleted that app, not realizing that just because they weren't interacting with the title anymore didn't mean that the apps or services weren't still interacting with them. So I guess the question I have, as a general rule, you decide you want to quit something. What sort of things should you do to make sure that you've actually quit that thing?
Well, if it's a girlfriend or boyfriend, I think today it's texting is how they do that.
Oh, hello. Hello. Anyway.
No, to make sure that, apps aren't accessing your data, first, go to your account page for that service, and see if there's an option to delete your account. If there's not, email the service and ask them to delete your account and all of its data. If that service happens to be Facebook, they will laugh at you all day long, but that's a whole different story. Delete any cookies on the service that they might have left on your computer. So on Safari, you go to Preferences, which is Command, choose the Privacy tab, then click Manage Website Data. You'll see a list of cookies and data, And in the search box, type the domain or part of the domain of the service. So Facebook, for example, then click remove all. And that will get rid of all the cookies and data that Facebook is storing on your computer. Unfortunately, Chrome doesn't allow you to get that granular, so you have to delete a lot of cookies. But it's still really easy. You go to Preferences, which again is Command comma. At the bottom of the preferences, choose Advanced. And then under Privacy and Security, at the bottom of the list, choose Clear Browsing Data. And while you can't delete only a domain's cookies, you can delete all the cookies from all sites at once. And honestly, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It basically gives you a clean slate in terms of, who's left information on your computer. And then finally, on your iOS device, go to your Settings app and choose Privacy. There, you'll see a list of apps that have requested access to the various services on your phone. Review this list and revoke access to any app you don't want to have access to your phone data. And whether or not you're looking for something specific or not, it's a good thing to do every now and again just to make sure you're protected.
Now, you answered the question from a very technical standpoint, and I appreciate that. I think at the very beginning, though, you said the part that honestly I was looking for or wanted to make sure that people understood. Just taking an app off your phone does not mean that you have, walked away from whatever that was. I'll tell you how this came up for us. One of the Nicks reacted to a truly terrible story on Twitter. An elderly woman was being charged $14 a week. I think I say here in the notes that it was a month, but it's actually a week. It was terrible. $14 a week for a coloring app that she had signed up for her grandson. And she deleted that app, completely unaware that deleting the app did not stop the charges, which, she seems to have been unaware of altogether. Deleting an app does not cancel an associated service. This was actually something. In another life, I worked for America Online. And people would think that if they just didn't go to America Online was going to stop charging them. But I mean, America Online always left that connection open, always kept their account open, and of course, always charged them until they actually called in to cancel. Then when they called in to cancel, it was still another 3 hours. But hey, what's 3 hours between you and an ISP that you're trying to get away from? Now, there were people in the thread about the woman who had, the coloring app thing. There were people in the thread on the original story who said deleting an app should automatically cancel a subscription, though others argued that that should not be the case. Maybe I don't want the Wall Street Journal on my phone anymore, but I do want the Wall Street Journal on my iPad or vice versa. Deleting an app should not cancel a service outright. That said, the Nicholas who brought us this story did have an idea. He says deleting an app should display a prompt asking if the user wants to cancel any associated subscriptions. That doesn't sound like that would be the hardest thing in the world for Apple to do.
While it's easy to armchair quarterback without knowing more details, my guess is that this is something that would be super trivial to do. I'd also weigh in here and completely agree. Throwing up a dialog box asking if you'd like to cancel that subscription is the best way to go. There's a lot of different reasons you might delete an app from a phone. The default for a lot of people, regardless of whether it's the right thing to do or not, the default, if they're trying to fix an app, is to delete it and re-download and install it. And you want to keep the subscription at that point. You're just trying to fix a problem with the app. So there's a lot of different reasons you might want to keep the subscription but get rid of the app. And a dialog box would certainly ensure that you could do both.
Yeah. I mean, I understand the knee-jerk reaction to say, well, if I delete the app, then obviously I don't want that anymore. Until somebody says,
exactly.
But what about this? And then you have to go, oh, yeah, maybe that, huh? Now, we went over these steps a few months ago when we did a scammy subscription story.
Which, by the way, $14 for a coloring app sounds like scammy subscription to me.
Yeah, no, it's that. I mean, look, what happened? That app is allowed to happen. I don't care how good the coloring book is. I mean, that's completely bogus. It's bogus that they allowed that. And I mean, look, it's not up to Apple to decide how much somebody charges. It's not up to Apple to make sure that everybody reads everything as well as they should, although maybe Apple should make that easier to do. Yes, that does very much sound like a scammy subscription. And as I say, we went over these steps when we were talking about scamming subscriptions a few weeks or months back, but it bears repeating, apparently, because here's a reason that somebody would need to know. How would you check to see what subscriptions are active on your iTunes account?
Go to the iTunes store on your computer or iOS device. On an iOS device, scroll to the bottom of the store page and tap on Apple ID. On a computer, tap on Account on the right-hand side of iTunes. Once you're in, look for the word subscriptions. Tap that, and you'll see a list of what subscriptions you have going. If there are subscriptions you don't want, you can disable them right there. Easy peasy. No more charging your credit card.
Now, I think I heard that Apple is actually going to make that stuff easier to see in a version of iOS going forward. But for the time being, that is how you would do it. And lest you feel bad, this is a thing that can happen. The reason that I have not said which Nicholas brought this story to our attention is because that Nicholas, after advising people on Twitter how to check and make sure that old subscriptions aren't billing you, that Nick found that one that he deleted over a year ago was still billing him $2.99 a month. It can happen to anyone. Stop it from happening to you. What do the checklist and an RSA presentation have in common? We'll find out in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from SecureMac. As careful as you are about the sites you visit, as careful as you are about the apps you install, there are hazards out there into which you and your Mac might stumble. Protect yourself with MacScan 3. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by SecureMac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for well over a decade. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full-range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your computer. You may never stumble into trouble, but if you do, MacScan 3's got your back. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by SecureMac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. Security researchers at last week's RSA conference presented an episode of the checklist. I mean, not really, but they kind of did.
How cool would that be, though?
That'd be kind of awesome. I'm thinking, I know what you and I are doing next March. Quoting a piece from CNET, it's long been legend that Macs are harder to hack than other computers. Not only are they said to be more secure, but fewer people use them, so hackers have less incentive to break in. Cybersecurity company CrowdStrike is happy to bust that myth. At the RSA conference last Thursday, CEO George Kurtz and CTO Dmitry Alperovich detailed hacking techniques that they've seen used to do a host of bad things on Apple-built computers. Now let's hit a few facts. Wikipedia says the RSA conference is a series of IT security conferences. Approximately 45,000 people attend one of the conferences each year. The RSA conference apparently decided that the lack of awareness around vulnerability and the Mac was such that it would be worth offering a presentation, and CNET decided that the lack of awareness around vulnerability and the Mac was big enough to have somebody write it up. One last point. This is what we've been saying on the checklist since the show started nearly 3 years ago. Now, none of that is said to brag. What I personally have learned from doing this show has grown exponentially, and I know that there is still a ton of stuff that I don't know. What we're going to do now is go over some of the points that CrowdStrike made, talk about the ways we can protect ourselves, then talk about one big way that we can help other people protect themselves too. One of the first CrowdStrike points, according to CNET, attackers can trick Mac users into downloading malicious software, then get deep access into the computer, the CrowdStrike executive said. They also have tools to loot the system's keychain for more passwords and build backdoors into the machines, allowing hackers to have repeated access. Now that makes it sound like two separate things, but it's likely that those errant downloads leading to the looting tools are, it's like the same thing, right? You get somebody to download something, and then that's how you get, access to the keychain and build in the backdoor and all that stuff.
Oh, absolutely. The download opens up the treasure chest, and the keychain, once they have that, boy, talk about keys to the kingdom, because not only do they have the keys to everything on your computer, they've got keys to everything that you visit online and have an account for.
Right. And they also know what you visit at that point. Like they may want your bank password, but they don't know your password and they don't know what bank. But if they can get into your keychain, oh, look, he's going to Federated Federal Credit Union and his password is 12345.
I hope not.
Well, I hope it's not 12345. Also, I'm not sure that Federated Federal Credit Union is real. And if it is, they really should consider a different name. Now, CNET did have the speakers encouraging people to leave Apple's Gatekeeper feature enabled to help make sure that software comes from a valid source. Remind people what Gatekeeper is, and if you would, also the various levels that users can apply.
Sure. Gatekeeper is Apple's way of making sure you don't download and run malware. Depending on how you have it set, it prevents non-trusted apps from opening. For the average person, it's a lifesaver, or maybe I should say data saver. In any case, you basically have two options with a third. If you don't know about it, you probably don't need it option. First, to see your options, open your system preferences and choose security and privacy. Under the general tab, you'll see the phrase allow apps downloaded from, and then two options. One is App Store. The other is App Store and identified developers. If you choose App Store, only apps downloaded from Apple's App Store will be able to run on your computer. This is the default, and it's the safest option. And honestly, this is what most people should have checked.
Yeah. If you're not some kind of, I would never call myself a power user, but what I use for audio editing is something that's not available in the Mac App Store. And it's reputable. It's, it's fine. It's whatever. But I have to have it set on that other setting. My mom, on the other hand, if she had a Mac, she doesn't. She's an iPad person through and through. If she had a Mac, I can't imagine that there's anything that she would need that wouldn't come from the App Store. So yeah, generally speaking, I tend to think though that people listening to this show might be, 201. Well, we might be talking to people like you and me who might need something that's not found in the App Store.
Sure. Well, the second option is called App Store and Identified Developers, and this will allow you to download and run apps not only from the App Store, but also from independent third-party developers who have a signed certificate from Apple. Again, this protects you because the signed certificate grants a little bit of trust. That said, it's not a 100% guarantee, so use that setting very carefully. And then finally, there's a third option that's not visible. This setting grants access to any app you download. It's basically the Wild West. And while it's not one of those I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you things, it is something that unless you're a developer or have really terrible disregard for your Mac and your data, you probably shouldn't be using it.
Now, CrowdStrike also suggested disabling macros, a feature in some Microsoft products, if you're using them on your Mac. What's more, the pair recommended users disable a feature in Apple's Safari web browser that automatically opens some files, which might end up being malware. Those things are similar, if memory serves. Can you go over macros, what they are, and why to avoid them?
Macros are essentially little programs that Microsoft has added to their productivity software to make certain repetitive functions easier. But with great power, as they say, comes great frustration. In general, when hackers look at attack vectors surrounding Microsoft Office, macros is where they start. Because these are little apps. They can do a lot of different things, and there's not a lot of protection for your data when it comes to them. So turning those off will make sure that those macros don't get access to your system.
And that's, the reason I say that sounds similar is because I mean, that sounds like the kind of thing that Safari does as well. The, automatically open downloaded files or whatever it is. Why would we want to turn that off?
Safari has a preference to open safe files after downloading, and safe files include images, PDFs, text documents, movies. When one of these is downloaded, Safari can automatically open it for you. To find this setting, you open Safari's preferences, which is Command, and choose the General tab. At the bottom, you'll see an option to turn opening safe files on or off. Having it on is super handy because you don't have to dig through your downloads folder to find what you just downloaded. Safari just opens it. But, and there's always a but, that's a big security risk. If someone figures out a way to make a file look safe, Safari could open it and potentially infect your computer. The best thing to do is have that file, is to turn off automatic opening of that file, and then have that file checked with scanning software first to make sure that it's not malware. Then you can open it with confidence and not have to worry about, whether it's going to infect your computer. Hey, Ken, do you know any good scanning software?
Some might come to me. I'll see if I can think of it before the show's over. Wrapping up the CNET piece, attackers also rely on baiting users into clicking on malicious links and following prompts that eventually lead to malware. That, of course, isn't a Mac-specific issue. CrowdStrike found malicious software that required users to click through 2 prompts to get permission. They did. Users click on just about anything, according to one of the guys from CrowdStrike. But what if the link is like in an email from my bank, August, or, like from a friend who wants to know if that's really me in that video, or, from a guy who needs my help bringing hundreds of thousands of euros to the US. I mean, these are important links to click. And of course, I'm lying. What should we look for, or what should we be worried about when we're clicking links?
Well, let's go back to the dialog boxes real quick. The best thing you can do there is actually read the dialogue. I've watched so many people just get impatient and click the blue button to close the box and move on. And in fairness, I've caught myself almost doing that a time or two. No one ever reads where it says delete all your files. They just click OK, and then they wonder where all their photos went. It's true. But in emails and on web pages, I always hover over a link and verify the domain. More often than not, that's just curiosity, but it's also verification. So if something is supposedly from Apple and I hover over the domain and the domain is, 123abc.com, I know it's not Apple and I can immediately delete that email. This saves me a whole lot of time. And then if I want to go to a website, I just type in the domain myself. There's lots of Unicode tricks that make a domain look legit, even in an email, even on a web page. So if I get an email saying I need to update my credit card, there's not a force in the world that's going to get me to click a link instead of logging in the normal way and just going to my account to make sure the email is legit. The thing you have to remember is you are always the first line of security for your data. So be vigilant and be safe.
And now, here's the thing that we can do to hopefully help more people protect themselves. And this is going to sound self-serving, but I promise it's not. Please tell friends and family members about this show. I doubt we're always right. We would like to always be right, but we're probably not. Heck, I know I've said things that are wrong before, but all the points that a cybersecurity firm made at a conference of IT professionals are points that we have been making here for years. Not because we're know-it-alls. We're not. We do it because there are things that you and your friends and family members can do to keep yourselves safe. Honestly, things that I've learned to do since starting the show that are helping now to keep me safe. We want you to know what those things are. We want you to know how to avoid the pitfalls. We want them to know as well. Online is a minefield, but there are easy ways to keep yourself from being blown up 9 times out of 10. So please tell friends and other folks you know about this show. And we'll keep trying to keep on top of the bad things and hopefully tell you how to steer clear. Hey, I mentioned episode 42 of this show earlier. That was the one where you can find out about more Internet of Things. There are all kinds of notes and shows and things that we've done in the past that might be helpful to you or someone you know. The place to find out about all of it is securemac.com/checklist. Let me say it again, securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.